You sit down in a medieval city holding a bowl of steaming food that could either keep you alive or quietly kill you before morning. The smell is thick, unfamiliar, and something about it feels wrong. In a world without clean water, refrigeration, or food safety, every bite is a risk. So how did people survive eating like this every single day? Before we step into that world, tell me where you're watching from. And if you think you'd last here, like and subscribe. Now, take the first bite. If you were born into the lower classes of a medieval city, say London around the year 1300, your entire day revolved around a single question. What can you eat today that won't leave you starving tomorrow? Your answer was almost always the same: pottage. This wasn't a fixed recipe. It was a constantly evolving stew. Grain, cabbage, onions, sometimes beans, and if you were lucky, a scrap of meat. The same pot sat over the fire for days, sometimes weeks, with new ingredients added as they became available. It was never fully emptied. It was never fully clean. And yet, it was your lifeline. Bread was your second anchor, but not the soft white bread we imagine today. Most people ate dark rye or barley bread, dense and coarse. Records from 13th century England show that lower-class bread often contained impurities, ground husks, even bits of grit from milling stones. It filled your stomach, but it wore down your teeth. Instead of plates, people used trenchers, thick slices of stale bread that absorbed the stew. After the meal, the trencher might be eaten or given to the poor or even animals. But this diet came with constant tension. Calories were barely enough. A laborer in 1300 might consume around 2,500 to 3,000 calories a day, but almost entirely from grains. Protein was rare, nutrition was uneven. Still, people survived. They woke, worked, and returned to the same pot. But the real danger wasn't in the food itself. It was in what they drank. In a medieval city, the most dangerous thing you could consume wasn't spoiled meat or rotten vegetables. It was water. Urban centers like London or Paris had no modern sewage systems. Waste, human and animal, flowed into streets, rivers, and open drains. The River Thames, for example, was both a water source and a dumping ground. Contemporary accounts describe it as thick with refuse by the 14th century. Drinking untreated water meant exposure to diseases like dysentery and typhoid. Even if people didn't understand bacteria, they understood the pattern. Drink bad water, get sick, or die. So they adapted. Instead of water, they drank ale, a weak, low-alcohol beer brewed daily. Its alcohol content, usually around 1 to 3%, was enough to inhibit harmful bacteria. Even children consumed small quantities of ale. It was safer than water. And brewing ale was not an industrial process. It was domestic. Women known as alewives produced it in homes, selling it locally. In many towns, ale was so essential that authorities regulated its price and quality. By the 13th century, England had official ale tasters to inspect it. But ale had limits. It spoiled quickly. It varied in quality. And when grain supplies dropped, so did ale production. Meanwhile, the wealthy avoided these risks differently. They imported wine from France or southern Europe, far safer, but far more expensive. So now the divide deepened, not just in what people ate, but in how safely they could drink. And that divide would shape everything that followed. If you stepped inside the home of a wealthy merchant or noble in the year 1300, the contrast would feel almost unreal. Instead of a single pot of pottage, you would see a table covered in variety. Meat, real meat, took center stage. Salted beef, roasted pork, game from hunting, and preserved fish like herring or cod. In fact, records show that in some noble households, meat consumption could exceed 100 kilograms per person per year, compared to almost none for the poor. But wealth didn't just mean more food, it meant different food. Spices, for example, were a status symbol. Pepper, Cinnamon, cloves, imported across thousands of miles from Asia, were incredibly expensive. In 14th century Europe, a pound of pepper could cost the equivalent of several days' wages for a laborer. These spices weren't just for taste, they signaled power. Wine flowed freely here, replacing ale. Imported from Bordeaux or the Rhine, it was safer, cleaner, and prestigious. Unlike ale, it didn't spoil quickly. Meals were structured, multi-course, and social. But even here, danger remained. Without refrigeration, meat preservation relied on salting or smoking. If done poorly, food could still rot. Food poisoning wasn't rare, it just wasn't understood. And hygiene? Limited at best. Hands were rinsed, not sterilized. Utensils were shared, plates were still often trenchers. So while the wealthy ate better, they were not immune. Because in the medieval world, food didn't guarantee safety. It only changed the odds. Everything changed when the food supply itself began to collapse. Between 1315 and 1317, Europe experienced one of the worst disasters of the Middle Ages, the Great Famine. Relentless rain destroyed crops across northern Europe. Fields flooded, harvests failed. Grain prices skyrocketed. In England, records show that the price of wheat more than doubled, and in some regions tripled. For the poor, this was catastrophic. Bread, their primary food, became scarce or unaffordable. People adapted in desperate ways. Pottage became thinner, more water, fewer grains. Bread was stretched with substitutes, ground peas, bark, even sawdust in extreme cases. Livestock died due to lack of feed, removing another source of food. Hunger led to unrest. There were reports of theft, riots, and even extreme cases of cannibalism in parts of Europe. Whether exaggerated or not, the fear was real. Food was no longer just sustenance. It became power. Those who controlled grain controlled survival. Merchants hoarded supplies. Authorities attempted price controls, often failing. And the divide between rich and poor grew sharper than ever. Because in a world where food is scarce, every meal becomes a decision between life and death. Despite everything, the unsafe water, the uneven nutrition, the famines, people did survive. But not because the system worked. They survived because they adapted. They learned to reboil food constantly, reducing the risk of contamination. Pottage, continuously heated, became safer over time. Ale replaced water whenever possible. People relied on local knowledge, knowing which vendors to trust, which foods to avoid. Communities mattered. Families shared food. Neighbors supported each other during shortages. In urban centers, guilds sometimes provided assistance to members. Religious institutions distributed bread to the poor during crises. Women, especially alewives, played a crucial role. By controlling local brewing, they indirectly controlled access to safe drink. But survival was fragile. Life expectancy in medieval Europe hovered around 30 to 35 years, though this was heavily affected by infant mortality. Disease, malnutrition, and food insecurity were constant threats. There was no guarantee. Even if you did everything right, you could still fall ill. Because this wasn't a system designed for comfort. It was a system people endured, and sometimes barely. When we look back at medieval life, it's easy to imagine the food as simple, even primitive. But it wasn't simple. It was a constant negotiation between survival, risk, and status. Every meal told a story. Pottage in a wooden bowl meant endurance. Spiced meat on a long table meant power. Ale in a cup meant safety, relative safety. And water meant danger. In cities like London around 1300, food shaped everything. Health, class, community, and survival itself. And perhaps the most surprising truth is this. People didn't eat for pleasure. They ate to stay alive long enough to eat again tomorrow. So now I'll ask you, if you lived in a medieval city with no clean water, no refrigeration, and no guarantee of your next meal, how long do you think you would last? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to experience more worlds like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me for the next story.